then that rules out all of the other as far as what was said to be the possible reasons, say for example a bird hit, weather conditions, or even when it comes to the aircraft itself not being maintained. The main reason that is now being cited as far as in this preliminary report is concerned in detail, it has put out drone photography, videography, all of that has been completed, and the wreckage that has now been moved to a secure area.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, remember, this is very, very significant and very key, because there are citizens of multiple countries who have participated, multiple citizens who are on board that aircraft, and all of their respective aviation bodies have been part of this report. If you look at the kind of findings, particularly the big question is that those engine switches, if they were switched off, how did that happen? Is it possible for that to happen without a human intervention? At this point of time, the report does not specify that. But yes, we know there are guardrails, for instance, that prevent it from actually happening, or physically pilots accidentally switching off those engines. And this happening at a time of takeoff is absolutely unimaginable. So what really has transpired? We are going to go across to experts who are with us. Our reporters are also there. But, we are going to have to analyze all of this. Remember, this is a preliminary report. The final findings could perhaps, with all the data, remember there are multiple parameters that the digital flight data recorder actually has, and after the final analysis, perhaps we'll get to know what better happened. But given the cockpit voice recorder talks about a communication between the pilots within the cockpit, where they are talking about one pilot telling the other, did you switch it off? The other says, no, I did not. What has happened in this scenario? That becomes extremely important to analyze. And that's why, 30 days after the tragedy, remember the ICAO guidelines specifically mention that there has to be a preliminary report. Let's quickly take this across to our guests who are with us. We have Suren Ratwate, who's a former CEO of Sri Lanka Airlines and an ex-pilot. Joining us, Captain Amit Singh is aviation expert and founder of Safety Matters Foundation. Joining us also is Captain Anurag Mittal, aviation expert. Let me come across to you first. Captain Anurag Mittal, what do you make of this report? Because this report talks about a confusion between the pilots, or some kind of communication between the pilots, where one of them says the engine has been switched off. They also then maintain that both engines were turned on. One of them was successfully turned on, the other there was an attempt but it could not achieve the required speed. What really has happened over here? It is not entirely clear. Can you analyze this for us, Captain Mittal?
See, again, from a trainer's perspective, I'm a simulator instructor, and I have, similar airplanes with FADEC engines. We were talking about the fuel cutoff switches, and these cutoff switches have guardrails. They are guarded switches, so you cannot accidentally bump them. These switches, you have to physically either lift them and put them off and stuff like that. So again, in my previous, I was telling you that, when an engine failed or there was some kind of a confusion in the cockpit, and maybe the pilots in that confusion were got trigger happy or something and turned that switch off. It had to be manually switched off. There is no other way to do this. So I've seen this in training, where I give them an engine failure right on takeoff, and then they start the training says don't touch anything, but a lot of guys will just start moving the switches. And this happening in real life would have set some confusion in the cockpit, and immediately, if the life is in danger and the adrenaline kicks in, and must have created this confusion in the cockpit and caused this, wrong engine to be shut off. That's just an analysis, what I have seen in training scenarios that I can put forward.
Right. Captain Amit Singh, would you like to come in on this? Does this theory of a possible pilot error, and that's what it appears to be pointing out to, is that theory, in your view, the most likely scenario given this particular report?
Well, the report begins with FAA service bulletin, which says that this particular part, the fuel control switches, there is a possibility of the lock getting disengaged. So if there is a possibility on the 737s and on the 787s, so this particular aircraft was affected by the service bulletin, which was advisory in nature, and Air India did not carry out the required checks to ensure that the locks were secure. So there is a possibility of a malfunction of the locks, and then we move ahead to see if there was a human error or any other factor. So first we have to eliminate the mechanical part and then move ahead to what was going on in the cockpit. So there are significant gaps in the data and in the CVR recordings. So those have been given selectively. Like, for example, if the start switches have been switched off, then there's a 10-second gap between them being switched off, then switching them on. So what was happening in the 10 seconds? What was the conversation going on between the pilots? Did they realize what were the fault messages, engine shutdown message? Did it trigger on the ICAS to the pilots? So 10 seconds is a long time at that stage. The aircraft is at 180 knots, about more than 300 kilometers an hour, and climbing at 2,000, 2,500 feet per minute. So in about 3 seconds would climb about, say, a good 300 or 400 feet. So that is the kind of speed that they are moving at. So that kind of gaps in the report does not kind of substantiate what was happening. And we come out with the mechanical, eliminate the mechanical first, then look at the human failure, not the other way around.
Right. But Mr. Surain, what is your analysis so far? Because the details that are now coming in, it says, and I'm just going to quote from that report, the preliminary report, it says that N1 and N2 parameters decrease as the fuel supply was cut off. Cockpit voice recording has revealed the conversation between the two pilots. However, this report does not yet state a final cause, but identifies the immediate sequence that led to the crash. What is your analysis on this?
Yes, good morning. It's actually an excellent report. Kudos to the AAIB for producing something quite so detailed. It's very, very well done and more detailed than is usual in a preliminary report. But as Captain Singh and Captain Mittal have both pointed out, there is one obvious cause here. The fuel switches were turned off. That's a fact. Now, can the fuel switches get turned off on their own? Well, there's a remote possibility of that. I am looking now at Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin number NM 1833 dated 2018, which I think Captain Singh mentioned. That is specifically a fault on some 737 aircraft. It is a possibility on the 787 aircraft, but it's not specifically mentioned as occurring on a 787. So that is a possibility, which, as Captain Singh pointed out, must be ruled out before we can go any further. If that can be ruled out, then it has to be human intervention. Somebody turn those switches off. And since both the pilots were surprised by them, the key question here, was there a third person in the flight deck? And did that third person turn the switches off? That is a possibility that we cannot ignore, because unfortunately there are precedents. Quite recently, Alaska Airlines Flight 2059 in the US, jump seat passenger, also a pilot, attempted to shut the engines down by pulling the fire switches. Luckily the crew intervened. They were at high altitude, and the flight landed safely. Some years ago, Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771, an off-duty crew member got into the flight deck and shot both pilots, resulting in a fatal crash, very sadly. So it's not unknown for this sort of thing to happen. It's extremely rare, but it's not unknown. And I find that the AAIB report not specifically mentioning whether there was or was not another individual in the flight deck a glaring omission.
Okay.
Because if there was someone else there, then we have some possibilities that have not been addressed yet.
All right, Arunil is also joining us. Before we go across to Arunil, I want Captain Amit Singh to explain this to us. Captain Amit Singh, you are referring to certain blocks and possible errors, but how can this possibly happen that a switch which has guardrails, which we know is such a sensitive part of the flight operation itself, how is it possible for the switch to have been turned on or off on its own? And, the precedence of this, the previous speaker was referring to, can you give us that? And also the kind of timelines that have been given in terms of the switch cutoff transitioned at about 8:08:50 UTC, the APU inlet door began opening at 8:08:54, consistent with the APU auto start logic. At 8:08:56, the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch also transitions from cutoff to run. When fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run, the aircraft is in flight. Each engine fully authority dual engine control automatically manages a relight and thrust recovery sequence of ignition and fuel introduction. They appear to be rising for both engines. Engine 1 scored deceleration, stopped, reversed and started to progress to recovery. Engine 2 was able to relight but could not arrest core speed deceleration and reintroduce fuel repeatedly to increase core speed and acceleration and recovery. EAFR recording stopped at 8:09:11 UTC. What exactly has happened over here? Can you break that down in simple language for our viewers?
So if we look at the timelines,
Yes.
we'll have to see the typical timelines when the aircraft started rolling. There are certain speeds at which the aircraft gets airborne. So if the aircraft gets airborne at 8:08:39 and achieves a maximum speed of 180 knots at 8:08:42, which means in 3 seconds. The 3 seconds, the aircraft would be around 50 feet. Yeah. Then we look at the snapshot, the image which is given in the report. The image shows the aircraft in the initial climb with the RAT deployed, the ram air turbine. The ram air turbine deploys only when both the engines are shut down. There's an electrical failure or both loss of power on both the engines. So the height at which this aircraft is in the image is around 50 feet. And the RAT is deployed, which means the engines have failed before this point. So RAT will take about 2 to 3 seconds to deploy. So if this is the position as at 8:08:42, which means 3 seconds before is 8:08:39, which is the point aircraft was getting airborne. And the engines would have failed even earlier. So all these timelines don't match. Even the CVR transcript, they have just given the sentences spoken by the two pilots, but they have to give the time stamp. So they have to correlate all these the timelines in order to make sense. So this kind of report in which the timelines do not match or tally had given the FDR readout, which is typically given in the preliminary report, even the Ethiopian report.
Right, that's a very, very important point. You're saying that the timelines are not coordinating or not matching at this point of time. It's all down to the seconds, but in such a precision-based aircraft, clearly all of this matters. It's all recorded in the flight data recorder, and that's why it's so significant. Arunil, we're just going to come to you in a minute, but Amita, take us through the key findings that this report has brought out.
All right, so this is a 15-page report on part of the AAIB that has been released. Exactly a month after that, we are now looking at this tragedy that has now happened, and we're going to just put it down as far as in a concise manner that is now coming across exactly what may have led to the sequence, exactly what has happened. And one of the findings which says that the plane destroyed due to the impact with the buildings on ground. Of course, we have seen right after it crossed the airport wall perimeter, then it was on the outskirts as far as residential areas. There were also schools and colleges there, and we have seen the impact as far as 5 buildings that were damaged because of the impact of the crash. Emergency locator transmitter in plane wasn't activated. This is also finding a mention as far as the AAIB report is also concerned, saying that the landing gear lever was found to be in down position. We'll take this point to our experts as well. What do you think of this aspect in the findings there? Also mentioning that the thrust levers remained forward, takeoff thrust until the impact. So what does this mean as far as the impact when the plane had reached its maximum speed for a takeoff? Fuel supply to the engines was cut off, takeoff values that also decreased, and this is a matter of seconds that we are speaking of when the pilots had to take that final decision. One of the pilots were heard asking about the sudden fuel stop. Now, this is mentioned in the AAIB report, the conversation between the two pilots. Did you cut off the fuel supply? No, the other pilot has responded. The other pilot says he did not press the fuel cutoff switches at all. Now, this is where the confusion begins, and this is where, when they start the attempt to restart, as far as when it comes to, there has been no significant bird activity observed in the vicinity. This was said to be one of the other reasons previously when the plane had crashed, to have said to be played a factor as far as in the crash is concerned. Plane began losing altitude before clearing the airport perimeter. We have seen that, of course, right after it crossed the airport wall perimeter, it decelerated, it lost its speed and altitude, and thereafter crashed. And of course, it was full, the tank, as far as the kind of fuel that it was carrying, in lakhs of liters, over 2 lakh. Now, seconds later, the fuel cutoff switch transitioned to run, but there was no time to recover, there was no time to revive. And what is being said, that engine 1 core deceleration stopped and then began recovering. However, the engine 2 was able to relight, but deceleration still persisted, as we know that the plane had already taken up its maximum speed for takeoff, and at that point engine 2 reintroduced fuel repeatedly to boost the acceleration, but there was no time to react. What has now been said, at around 1:39 p.m. one of the pilots transmitted mayday, mayday, mayday. Now, mayday call is the emergency call that is given to the ATC. 3 times that has been said by the pilot, and that is when they realized that there is no coming back from here. The ATC inquired about the call sign, but did not get any responses, and that is where it is being said that there was complete silence, and seconds after takeoff, Madhav, we have seen the plane crash.
Absolutely. Arunil, very, very significant, because this sets to rest a lot of the theories that were being propounded. One is any possibility of fuel-related sabotage, because they've inspected the Bowsers. That does not appear to be the case. There's also the entire theory of electrical failure at this point of time that, at least from the report, does not seem to be indicated anywhere. What caused the switch, though, to go into the off mode is still a mystery. That is something that is unclear. There are some clues in relation to a 737 related part that was being spoken about by one of our guests, but that still appears to be a bit of a mystery. Arunil.
Well, certainly, yes, Madhav. Basically, it establishes why exactly the crash took place. To simplify for our viewers, the fuel from the tank stopped reaching both the engines. This is why the crash has taken place. To revise the sequence of events as per the preliminary report released by the AAIB as well, exactly at 1:38:42 seconds, 1:38 p.m. 42 seconds, it was the fuel tank, the fuel switch, it changed from running to cut off. That is when one of the pilot asked the other pilot that, why did you cut off? The other pilot responded saying, I did not do so. And only within 20 seconds, at 1:39 p.m., a mayday call was made by the pilot in command. And after that, when the ATC responded, there was no response, unfortunately, from both the pilots. It was basically a crash that we saw. Now, what exactly is the reason behind it? One of the other technical aspect that has been mentioned in the report, Madhav, is the N2 value of both the engines. It fell below the minimum ideal speed mark as well. Now, what is the reason why the fuel from the tank stopped reaching both the engines? How the fuel switch, it changed from running to cut off? Exactly what is the reason for it? Is there any foul play in it? Is there a kind of a manual error which led to this? Can it happen automatically? That obviously the experts are going to look into. The AAIB has also mentioned about the aspect that they have sought further evidences from all the stakeholders in this case, be it Boeing, be it Air India, as well as the other stakeholders, to carry on their investigation further as well. But at least till now, within 30 days, the preliminary report that the AAIB has submitted, has released, it establishes, it basically puts to rest all the other theories, be it bird hit, be it other theories that were going around, that it was the fuel from the fuel tank which stopped reaching both the engines, and immediately there was an engine shut off. The pilots tried to revive the engines as well. One of the engines